Good morning, everybody. I'm Michelle McKenzie, CEO of Shelter WA, and I'd like to welcome you today to this webinar on the Social Housing Economic Recovery Package. Before starting, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that we're meeting today, the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. And I'd like to acknowledge all of the people here on the webinar and staff at the department for the great work that you do. Firstly, I would like to congratulate the department. The SHERP package is an incredible achievement, and I want to acknowledge all the work that would have happened behind the scenes to get this package together. And I really want to thank the department for providing this briefing today. And we're really pleased that we've got Nigel Hindmarsh, who's the Assistant DG General Assets. Do you want to wave, Nigel, so we can see who you are? Great. Monica Nikshevich, who's the Program Director for SHERP. Do you want to give us a wave, Monica? Great. We've got Buster Arnott, who's the Program Manager for SHERP. Hi, Buster. And we've also got Kate Loudon joining us, and Kate is the Manager of Housing Policy. So we're really, really pleased for them to join us today to provide an overview. You would have seen in the calendar invitation the agenda for today. Firstly, we're going to have an overview and governance of SHERP, the program outcomes and some of the streams and activities. Then we're going to talk about the opportunities for the community housing sector involvement with the new builds, the refurbs and the regional maintenance, and then a Q&A session. So enough from me. I'll hand over now to Nigel and his team to provide the briefing. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Michelle, and I really do appreciate the recognition of the work that the team put in to get us to this point. I can safely say it's been the busiest 4 or 5 months of my working career at the department, the last few months, and I didn't realise until recently why the Chinese curse of may live in interesting times was a curse, but now I'm actually looking forward to perhaps some quieter times. But in the meantime, as you've identified, there's a fantastic opportunity through the Social Housing Economic Recovery Package, and I thought I'd give a bit of a context of how we got to a decision by government before Monica goes into the detail of the package itself, because I think it's important to understand the drivers from a political and government level for this package before we start going into the detail of it. So discussions started within the first few weeks of the pandemic restrictions being put in place about how we were going to sustain employment and economic activity during the pandemic and while it was occurring. That's not to say there wasn't at the same time parallel discussions about all the social industry and other outcomes that were required. But the discussion around the Social Housing Economic Recovery Package was born out of an economic discussion rather than a social discussion. So at a very early stage, Treasury and Department of Communities started working very closely together on what we could do to leverage the existing assets that the government holds and the existing mechanisms we have to keep jobs flowing. And it was recognised very early on that social housing is a core component of the ability of government to be able to react. Because it's not dependent on market conditions. We have control over many of the levers that are important to it, whether they be the assets, the capital, the procurement mechanisms. And so the gestation of the Social Housing Economic Recovery Package started very early in the pandemic. The actual COVID response evolved very quickly and very differently, I think, to most of us expecting to happen in WA. So for a while it was just put on hold. Then as it became apparent we were going to emerge from the restrictions much sooner than we thought, and therefore the labour force could be mobilised, the Social Housing Economic Recovery Package was taken off the shelf again, shall we say, as a mechanism to be able to do that. So it did actually start very early, back in, I'm losing track of time now, but it would be early March that we started working on this. But then it all started evolving very quickly again about 5, 6 weeks ago, at which point the package changed slightly, but on the whole it maintained the core streams, which were around how do we create new builds of social housing, how do we leverage the ability to refurbish, which gets jobs moving quickly, but also gives us an ability to tackle some of the very deteriorated and ageing assets across the social housing portfolio. And how do we leverage maintenance in the regional areas as a way of propping up jobs, particularly in regional areas that have been very heavily impacted by the impacts of COVID. Package was pulled together. Unusually for one of these sorts of packages, it remained fairly unscathed through the decision-making process with government. So the version you see now is very similar to what the proposal that was put up. But through the process, a couple of things were made quite clear to me from the Premier downwards, which was this is first and foremost a jobs package. Whilst there are very clear social benefits that can be gained from this, your priority is to be getting jobs moving and getting contracts awarded as quickly as possible. And that was the reason why it was set up in the way that it was. So that resulted on the 7th of June with the Premier's announcement about housing stimulus package. That incorporated not just the social housing economic recovery package, but the home builders grants. The reaction to the home builders grants in terms of creation of jobs has just been extraordinary. We're seeing levels of activity in the construction industry that we haven't seen for 7 or 10 years, tenfold increase in sales almost overnight. The challenge is how we sustain that post the end of the grants, and this package will also be an important part of not just creating jobs and sustaining jobs, but how do you make sure that they still exist in 9, 12, 18, 24 months' time. So the second part of it was the stimulus package, the SHERP package, or SHERPA as I prefer to call it, but I keep losing my A off it. And the first stream of that is a construction stream. It was amended slightly during the approvals process to include a purchase off the plans scheme, so that we can pre-purchase shovel-ready apartments to get those projects up and running. But we will be purchasing those apartments for the purposes of government housing programs. So we're suitable for social housing and we're not for affordable housing or other programs. The second stream, which is the major piece of work, is the refurbishments of 1,500 existing dwellings. Now, the specific language that we wrote into the submission was that this was public housing, community housing and supported accommodation. And we were deliberately trying to retain enough flexibility to be able to take on deteriorated other community assets such as FDV, refuges, group homes, etc. through there. So we tried to retain the language as broad as possible within that. The third element was very regionally focused, and it was a targeted maintenance program for the 3,800 housing assets in these regions. And those are government-owned assets, so they would include social housing, grow housing, key worker housing, and other government assets that are under the auspices of departments at the moment. So I'll let Monica go into the detail, but I just wanted to give the context and a very clear direction from the top down that the primary driver for this is making sure that as much job and economic activity is created. And the reason I say that is because it may lead to compromises along the way about which assets are included, the sorts of outcomes that are achieved. That's not to say that I and this team here aren't very heavily focused on achieving those, but we are also under very clear writing instructions about the timeframes and the speed of delivery about that. And that's led to decisions about delivery mechanisms and other processes that I think Monica will run through as we go through. So I'll hand over to Monica now.
Thanks, Nigel. Now, if I bring the next one across, down. Beautiful. All right. Thanks, Nigel. And as Nigel mentioned, this is absolutely a jobs package, and that's sort of a non-negotiable as we roll out SHERP. However, we are the Department of Communities, and we will be driving some other important outcomes through this program. And I think Nigel just touched on a few of them. I mean, first and foremost, more West Australians will have a place to call home through this program. But there are also some really important economic employment opportunities for vulnerable cohorts, those being Aboriginal people, women and youth, particularly those two because they've been disproportionately affected by COVID, and also people with disability. So we'll be working through our procurement levers to make sure we can optimise employment opportunities through SHERP. And as Nigel mentioned, through that refurbishment stream, so we have those three streams, new build, refurbishment and maintenance. Through the refurbishment stream, there is some real ageing accommodation out there that we will be looking at, whether it's residential group homes for our kids in care, disability supported accommodation at the group homes, and various crisis accommodation around the state. So that's going to be tricky. That's going to be take a lot of planning and thoughtful planning, because that's going to involve tenant relocation for some vulnerable people, but really important work in front of us. And importantly also, it's about our social housing stock being more livable, sustainable in terms of our environmental footprint and our energy ratings, and accessible, particularly for those who are ageing, so people can age in place a bit better, and also people with disability. So there's some other outcomes we'll be driving through this program. And at the moment, I'll talk more as we go through the slides. We're going through a process of being very clear on what the outcomes are that we will be achieving through this program, because at the end of the day, if we're not clear on that, we're not going to be able to drive it and report on it and be held to account on those things. So we're in the process of doing a decision-making framework that will underpin this whole program, which we will share with you once it comes together. Given the size and scale of this program, it goes without saying that we need to have a really strong governance structure. So to that end, an oversight committee is currently being set up, and it will likely meet in early or mid-July. It will have senior representation from DPC, Department of Treasury, Department of Finance and Communities, and it's likely to be either at DG or Tier 2 level. That committee will not only oversee SHERP, but it will also oversee other communities housing stimulus programs, such as the Metronet Social and Affordable Housing Package, and also our housing and homelessness investment package, which some of you would be obviously aware of. Michelle Andrews, our DG, is looking at other mechanisms to strengthen our governance and accountability throughout the department, one of those being appointing John Langalon as independent chair for our Finance and Investment Committee. So those decisions requiring, financial decisions will go through that committee, and John has commenced as independent chair. Michelle is also looking at increasing the number of independent members on our committees, so that will be happening over the months and years ahead as well. In terms of SHERP and other housing stimulus programs within the department, we are establishing a senior working group to make sure all different parts of our department, and as you know, we are a very broad department now with lots of different projects that relate to homelessness and housing and other portfolios, but how do we all make sure we are working together and drive to the same outcomes? So that senior working group will have members from across the department, and we're also looking at other government agencies, partner agencies and partner organisations. And I'll be talking to Shelter WA and Michelle in particular about that offline, and we can have questions at the end. And also a dedicated program office. And this is where I come in. I've been asked to lead the program office that will oversee all three of those stimulus programs to make sure they're delivered on time, on budget, and without compromising those outcomes that we intend to achieve, and to be that sort of independent team that looks at it from a whole of agency, whole of government perspective to make sure we're delivering. I won't spend too much time on this, but the program office really is about making sure, as I mentioned, we deliver on time without compromising on the outcomes. Work closely with Nigel and the executive sponsor to make sure we get momentum going quickly, particularly for SHERP. We have a small amount of time to deliver some large targets. Making sure we just don't think about this from across Department of Communities, but across the sector. How do we work better with the sector? Yes, push fundamental program management across the department. Reporting for us is going to be massive. We have lots of reporting obligations under SHERP, and rightly so. So we will be providing fortnightly briefings to Minister Tinley. We will be providing quarterly report backs to ERC. And we will also be providing information through the Department of Finance around their major capital programs reporting that also goes up to ERC on a regular basis. So lots of reporting, so we need to make sure we have the reporting framework and the outcomes clearly articulated. Part of the program office will obviously be looking at risk. And another important role that I'm quickly getting my head around is how do we actually make sure we understand who all our stakeholders are, and we actually communicate in a way that everyone is informed, There is nothing worse, and we've all had experience when messaging is confused, we don't know where to go, people don't have the information they need. So spending a bit of time on that at the moment, making sure we understand who our stakeholders are and how they want to be engaged with at what time and by what mechanism. And it goes without saying, we have an opportunity here to lead by example, to make sure we are walking the walk when it comes to integrity and making sure we are very thoughtful regarding our cultural competence. This program is across the regions, and we need to be leading an example about how we engage and think about being culturally sensitive and appropriate in how we roll this out. And of course, talking about walking the walk with our CREATE values. And for those who don't know what that stands for, our values are courage, respect, empathy, accountability, trust, and empowerment. This is a busy slide, so I'll let you just glean your eyes over it. It's essentially our governance structure for housing stimulus projects within the Department of Communities. The top right box is the oversight committee I mentioned a moment ago, with representatives from the 4 agencies. The big grey box is essentially our operational delivery area, if you like, which is the senior working group that will be represented there, with representatives from across the department, but also partners across not just government, but non-government as well. There are 4 work streams there that you'll see. The first work stream is construction, but that covers not just SHERP, but also Metro and Housing and Homelessness Investment Package. And then the refurbishment stream, a regional maintenance stream. The 4th stream is not related to Minister Tinley in the housing portfolio. That is special projects that we've put in here at an operational level. They are Minister McGurk led priority projects, but from an internal working group perspective, they're important projects that intermingle with the outcomes we're trying to achieve as a department. So it makes sense to actually bundle them together under the senior working group. The first 3 work streams, however, is what really the focus will be on for SHERP, and from a governance that goes up to the oversight committee. On the far left, there's a few small white boxes. I don't know if you can read it, but essentially it's talking about the actual doing of the work will sit within existing business units. They might need to grow a little bit given the huge amount of work that's coming through SHERP, because it is not business as usual, but the normal business delivery units will be delivering the work. And you'll see on the far left, in terms of approvals, so finance decisions will go through up the Finance and Investment Committee, as mentioned, up through Michelle Andrews to the Minister for Housing, and as needed, up through to ERC. So that just gives you a bit of a framework on how we're operating. And happy to take questions at the end if that's helpful. Okay, numbers and figures and stats, which is always the bit we want to see. So this is very early figures, but it gives you an idea by work stream, and there's a couple of slides coming through about how we're organising the work under each work stream. So this is the first work stream, which is around new builds. The grey is how we allocate work. The dark blue is when actual works commence, and that's the important one, because that's when we've actually got, you know, tradies on the tools, so to speak, which is what this is all about. And then the time frames of when we expect the works to be completed. So the next 3 to 4 months, we're going to be looking at the planning work to get works commenced by October 2020 for the new builds. A bit of work going on there, and you can sort of see the allocations we need to start working through over the coming months.
Probably worth just highlighting why at the top of that slide says based on 150 new builds.
Yeah. So when we did this initial planning, so the 97 million for the new construction stream that was through SHERP, that includes new builds, but it also includes, as Nigel mentioned, off the plan purchases. There's a call for submissions out at the moment on Tenders WA. We don't know yet because it hasn't closed. It closes on the 3rd of July, what the response to that will be by industry. So then they might take up 10 to $20 million worth of that 97. So really, whatever we're expecting in total, probably 250 new builds, but new dwellings. But of that, how much will be new builds versus off the plan purchases, we don't know yet. We're expecting maybe about a third of the 97 million will go to off the plan purchases, but we don't know yet. It might be 5 mil, but it might be 30 mil. We're waiting to see the quality of the responses that come through that meet the criteria. So we base this on 150 new builds, but it might be 200 or more if the calls for submission is quite a small response. So again, very indicative numbers only. You'll see the pie graphs there. very indicative. We're thinking about 2/3 will be for public housing for new builds and about 1/3 community. They're indicative, so we don't know yet, and we'll talk more about how we're going to get that information and work with you around what that will end up looking like. In terms of location, it's statewide for new builds. About 3/4 will be in the metro area and about 1/4 in the regional, but again, to be qualified yet. The second work stream, which is arguably, I'll probably get in trouble for saying it, but potentially our most risky work stream, because it's going to involve relocating tenants, and that needs to be done really thoughtfully. And it's big numbers, it's 1,500 properties. In terms of timeframes, we're looking to allocate as of next month and works commencing from August. So there's a lot of work being done there. I mentioned the work streams before. Within the department, David Lysenko will be work stream lead within the department driving the new builds. Dan Ballard, I'm not sure if you know Dan, he'll be leading the the refurbishment work stream. And I know his team are working very hard right now planning for this, and they're starting to think about relocation and how to do that, because that's not business as usual, because that's a big body of work. But you can see the indicative figures there about the works commencing from August and the flow of works over the coming 2 years. And again, it's estimated that it will be 1/3 community housing and 2/3 public. And probably a little bit more in the regions for this one, so 30% in the regions, 70% metro. Maintenance, so this is only over 12 months. So this is going to be an absolute sprint for us as a department to do this work, and it is only in the regions. So metro is not within scope, because obviously the regions have been disproportionately affected by COVID. So this is going to be a quick piece of work. We are allocating as we speak, and works will be commencing from next month. Quite a few housing programs included, and you can see that at the top right there: public housing, community housing, key workers, grow, Aboriginal housing and non-government, again, all in the regions. And the percentages by which are yet to be confirmed. By region, this is just to give an indication of the approximate number of properties that we're looking at for by region, by work stream. And you can sort of see the figures there. It's quite a busy slide, so I'll let you cast your eyes over. These will all need to be qualified with the regions, because this is based on a bit of a desktop analysis in terms of how many properties we already have in their regions, the age. Some regions have more ageing stock than others, but this is yet to be qualified with the regional executive directors in terms of, while we know there might be ageing stock in a particular area, there actually might be more of a need in that area for housing to be somewhere else. So this is yet to be qualified, but it does give you a flavour of what we're talking about. The little asterisk there, the 2,500 properties for the Pilbara, that's quite a large figure. There, and you'll see at the bottom there, that includes about 1,300 required termite inspections. So that kind of sort of blows out the figures for that one, but there's quite a bit of work needing to happen that's been identified as needing work in the Pilbara, which is probably worth mentioning. And the West Kimberley also has some big numbers there for maintenance. Procurement. So really important to think about how we're going to do this, by what levers. There's a saying which you probably have heard, which is we need to fly the plane while building it. And it is very true for this program. So we can't wait for us to have the perfect program designed, articulated, planned for before we start getting works up the door, because this is about jobs and giving economic security to our tradies around WA. So we are talking about Sprint 1 language, where we are going to allocate works quite quickly through our existing procurement levers that we have, while we actually do this proper planning work. So Sprint 1, we will be using our existing design and construct panels, and also our existing head maintenance contractors for the maintenance work. That said, we already have started to put the cogs in place to start turning. We are on Tenders WA at the moment. There is a new design and construct and or housing refurbishment panel that's currently out to expand the number of organisations that actually can get involved in this program from the new builds and major refurbishment works. And we're also working with our head maintenance contract team, we're working with our head maintenance contractors, and we have 4 of them, to make sure we build into their ways of working to make sure new trades get on their books and making that a requirement that they are working with new trades to expand the number of trades who are actually getting involved in this economic stimulus. We have a Northwest Urban Construction and Development panel that we'll be using, and we'll also be using public tender as per usual for ad hoc, high value pieces of work. And as I mentioned earlier, there is currently a calls for submissions tender out at the moment that closes on the 3rd of July, and that's just for that first work stream around new builds for off-the-plan purchases. So community housing organisations, so let's get to the important stuff. So really, you're obviously going to be involved in all parts of this, the 3 work streams. At the end of the day, what is not up for negotiation is this is about jobs and the timeframes that we've been articulated by government that we can't negotiate on, and also the quantum of funds. So they're the things we know that we can't deviate from. So to that end, in terms of proposals, and we'll be working closely with you all and we'll have more information over the coming weeks. But for the new builds, to get involved, it will need to be construction ready projects. To that end, the land will need to be largely deconstrained to ultimately to ensure that any new builds is up and finished by 30 June 2022. It will need to be about jobs creation and economic activity. Due to the tight timeframes, the existing procurement levers and the ones we're looking at expanding will need to be used. Just manage risk and timeframes. The ownership to be determined, however, depending on the proposal put forward, we'll be considering that the community housing organisations involved will have ownership. And also that the property will be utilised for social housing and an existing agreement will be in place to ensure it remains in stock. So that's for the new builds workstream, and I suspect there'll be questions, so we'll have plenty of time to answer some of your questions at the end, and I can jump back to these slides. Refurbishments, so this is the 1,500 refurbishments over 2 years. So these will be communities owned assets under management by yourselves. Works to be completed within 2 years. Again, using existing procurement levers to make sure the works are done on time, and we can manage the risk around making sure they're done to a suitable standard and within the timeframes and are able to report on all that stuff. Residential group homes, disability group homes, crisis accommodation, all in scope as mentioned earlier. It's worth noting we don't have any, this is not about operational additional funding. So with the works that we'll be doing with you, they need not to require additional operational funding. And we'll be talking with you as well about how do we manage the client relocations and managing continuity of service. So that's one thing that we will need to be unpacking a lot more with you, because that's a big body of work. And what does that look like? Maintenance, so this is the one that's a 12-month sprint of 3,800 in the regions. So again, communities owned assets under management with yourselves. It needs to meet a definition of planned maintenance rather than reactive maintenance. And we can talk more about what that looks like in reality. Regional areas only, works done by 2021 or June 30, 2021, and using existing procurement levers in the regions. So they're the bits we know, but obviously a lot of things yet we don't know and yet to work through. So to that end, we will be undertaking an EOI process, or something that looks like an EOI process, we haven't defined it yet, to identify the proposals from yourselves, the community housing sector, that meet the intended outcomes for the 3 streams. We're going to be moving pretty quick on this, so yep, no rest for the wicked. And we will be working with you to, obviously, when the proposals come in, we're going to have to work with you beyond the initial EOI process to make sure we can work with you and make this a success, because at the end of the day, we all want the same outcome. And I think we'll be working pretty closely together to get this done and to get this done fairly quickly. Next steps, yourselves and us will be talking further about opportunities and how for yourselves to get involved, and also just clarifying the parameters of SHERP. We know what's up for negotiation, what's not, and we will obviously start the EOI process. and what that looks like. And we'll talk more with Shelter WA and yourselves around that, what that would look like. And also we're keen for Shelter, the representative body, so Shelter WA, to be on our senior working group potentially, if there's an interest there, to make sure we have all the voices around the table to make sure this is a success. So, and I'm sure there's more next steps. That's just get you thinking about that. No doubt you will be, you will have people saying, you know, tell us about SHERP, how do we get involved, or whatever it might be. We do have a dedicated web page, and we also have a dedicated email address, which the team here answer and make sure is responded to. So if any of your teams, yourselves, anyone in the sector, any of your tradies that you know are trying to get involved, please encourage them to those sites, and we will be able to help. And that is it from me. So I will stop sharing this slide, but potentially, actually, Michelle, do you want me to leave it up there? I'll leave it up to you. How do you want to go from here?
I'm easy, Monica. Thanks. How do you want to handle the questions? I think Heather's going to moderate the questions, but are you happy to facilitate the Q&A?
Yes, I can't see the questions, so if someone could actually just say them out loud, Michelle, that would be helpful, then we can respond.
Great. Okay, Heather, can you hear me?
Hello, yes, I can.
So in terms of the questions, are you able to see the questions that are coming through?
I can see the questions, but I'm just waiting on some to come through, please. Great.
Okay, so this is the opportunity. Firstly, thank you, Monica, Nigel and Buster for the presentation. It's really great that the community housing sector is involved to see how we can add value to the SHERP program. Does anybody have any questions that they'd like to ask Monica, Nigel or Buster or Kate from a policy perspective?
And just to note for people as well, if they're not used to raising questions in this format, if they go down to the bottom of their screen, they will see a Q&A cloud down at the bottom. So if they just click on that and they can ask any questions in there.
Michelle, if there's not any in, oh, sorry, Paul just popped up, but just before we answer that one, I suspected one of the questions would be raised, it hasn't popped up yet, is the involvement of the community housing sector prior to the announcement, because we did engage with a couple of community housing providers just to get indicative information so that we could shape the package. And I wanted to just reiterate, that's no way an indication that we're only intending to work with the people we spoke to. It was just an opportunity to validate some of our thinking prior to it going through the confidential ERC process. So just to reassure people that if they haven't already had a phone call doesn't mean that they don't get a Guernsey.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Nigel. That's a great clarification. So the questions are coming through now. Heather, did you want to read the questions out, or can you see them, Monica and Nigel?
I can, yes, we just can see them now. Do you want me to work through them?
That would be great. Thank you.
Yep, so will access to SHERP be limited to registered community housing providers only? It's my understanding that is correct. Yep. Timing for the EOI process and likely format for submission. ASAP, in terms of, so look, we'll be working with Shelter WA on your behalf over the coming weeks. I'd like to think within the next month we're going to be moving on this, and the likely format for the submission yet to be determined. So we need to sit down and work with Shelter to work that through. Stream 2 is not available for planned maintenance at all and must be full refurb. So stream 2 is the refurbishment stream. So that is not maintenance. So part of this is absolutely being clear on the definition of refurbishment and the definition of maintenance. And part of the work that we did that I mentioned at the beginning was defining the intended outcomes from this program. Part of that is being very clear on our definitions, so we're all clear. And there's a bit of grey between refurbishment and maintenance, so it's a real focus for us to be able to define that clearly for you, and that's happening as we speak. And also the work we're doing is also understanding all the decision points in this program of work, from how we allocate, how we qualify, how we deliver, how we evaluate success. And so that decision-making framework will become available and we will share it with you. But yeah, it's currently being drafted as we speak and being workshopped, and Yeah, so that's pretty exciting. But in terms of that question, yeah, refurbishment definition will guide and we'll make that very clear so you know the difference between refurbishment, which is quite major works, versus maintenance and what that definition looks like. In terms of refurbs, I'm just looking at Michael Pugh's question. In terms of refurbs, would properties under JVs with the department also be eligible?
i.e. are refurbishments on properties that aren't owned by, on our asset base, owned by us, but are operated and owned by the community housing sector, be eligible?
I'm not sure.
Yeah, we'll take that one on notice and come back with an answer to you through, I guess, in terms of questions we can't give a definitive answer to now, Michelle, if we come back to you, if you're able to provide those to the attendees, would that be possible?
That's great, Nigel. And just in case people aren't aware, we're recording this and also the slides will be available for people to look at. So we'll also pull together and curate the Q&As.
Beautiful. Okay, when is the EOI for community housing organisations looking at coming out? Work soon, yeah, within the month or so. We'll be working to get it out just because of the tight timeframes. Is it possible to clarify if properties built
Same question. Yeah.
under joint venture? So I think Nigel's answered that. That's from Luke. So to be clarified, and we will send that answer out to you.
Yeah.
Is the refurbishment stream available to head lease properties, for example, those that are administered by NGOs for transitional housing programs?
Yeah, potentially.
All right, can you go down to Sean for me? Oh, good. What do you mean when you say government owned? Is it wholly owned and managed by community housing providers, or would Schedule AB properties on the community housing agreement be eligible?
The discussion that we had in forming the submission would be that those should be eligible. So those properties that we allocate to the joint waiting list would be eligible for refurbishment whether they're owned by the community housing sector or by public or by the department.
Great. Okay, rationale for stream 2 and 3 restricted to managed properties only.
Not quite clear on the question there. Perhaps Dwayne could just clarify when you say managed properties, to whom you're referring, that would be good.
So that's, yep, so it's the refurb and maintenance streams, yep.
Michael, we will come back with clarity over the criteria around what we mean by ownership or which properties will be eligible. So we'll do some more work and come back through Michelle on what the those criteria actually look like. It will be to a degree, we will be able to give you broad criteria, but we have such a breadth of different natures of relationship with the community housing sector and arrangements in place. Some of them may be on a case-by-case basis. Once we get the properties through the EOI, we assess whether we think they fit the purpose of the programme.
All right, how are builders to be appointed? If this is in relation to the new builds, it'll be through our design and construct panel. That is the process by which we will be doing the new builds.
For the metro areas?
Yes, for the metro areas. New build investment is about social housing outcomes, absolutely. However, are you willing to consider investment in specialist disability accommodation projects? At the end of the day, this is about jobs and this is about construction ready projects. So we can deliver jobs within the timeframes required. So that's absolutely non-negotiable and what the parameters of the ERC submission was about. I've lost the question.
It's about SDA. The challenge at the moment, and Gary will be very aware of this, is over the role that government plays in SDA. At the end of the day, we are predominantly focused on the existing definitions of public and community housing. If within the time frame of this programme there is clarity over the role as an SDA registered provider, then they may be incorporated. But at the moment, without that clarity, I suspect that they wouldn't fall into the programme.
But Gary, Natalia Gemmell and I are happy to discuss that with you further if you want to give us a call.
Okay, I can't see any new questions. Can we submit proposals ahead of the EOI, or do we need to wait? Look, I'd suggest you wait. Otherwise, you might be wasting your energy and resources into something. We will be moving pretty quick on this, but if you have the time and energy, start putting your heads together and thinking about it. But I would suggest wait, unless, yeah.
We're not likely to be allocating those community housing properties until we've completed the EOI anyway. We're focused in the first case on the allocating of works to public housing where we're ready to go. So it would just be wasted time. This will be a quick EOI process. So you won't have to wait long to be able to submit.
Yeah.
But one of the main reasons of the briefing today was to start the thinking around, having given you the rough criteria, start thinking around where you have vacant land, where you have existing properties that might fit into the programme and have the opportunity to benefit from the capital. I would reiterate, I know it was in Monica's slides, but I would reiterate there is no operational funding attached to this. So it does require the sector to be providing, we will be providing the capital and the construction. It needs the sector to be able to provide the operational funding to support the dwellings once they're completed or refurbished.
Louise, is in the governance structure that will Shelter WA be included as the peak body for housing and homelessness, including their expertise? Yes, we'd like to include Shelter WA within our senior working group. If Michelle wants to be involved, that would be great.
Thanks, Monica. We'd love to be involved. There's a couple of questions in the chat, so I'm not too sure if you can see them. But there's one from Catherine Morey. The stream through, are you basically looking at oldest properties first, and how are these properties being chosen?
Yes, so in terms of what properties, there will be a criteria, and age is absolutely probably one of the top of the criteria. Obviously, the older the asset, the more likely it will need either maintenance and or refurbishment. But there's quite a few other criteria as well. Some aging stock has been looked after quite well. It's not the only criteria. So we'll be defining that as we speak, and we'll be sharing that with you. But it is one of the criteria, absolutely.
One of the other criteria that we were trying to build into the programme was the opportunity to improve the utility of existing property. So in the case of public housing, a fair amount of our legacy stock isn't fit for purpose for those who have particular accessibility needs. So wherever possible, for instance, we'd be seeking to bring them up to a minimum silver standard livable homes criteria. So it's not just about putting a fresh lick of paint or a new kitchen. It's actually how do we make the existing social housing stock more appropriate to the cohorts and indeed the emerging cohorts on the back of COVID to be able to meet those needs.
Thanks, Nigel. And there's a question in the chat from Luke Garswood. So could you please consider inclusion of community housing providers that are not registered as being eligible? There are thousands of social housing properties that are managed by organisations not yet in this structure.
All right. Yes, we'll commit to have a look at that, and we will come back with a definitive answer as to whether they can be included or not, and if they are included, whether there's particular, because that's predominantly related to the assurance around the regulatory environment, I guess. But we will come back with a confirmation around that, Michelle. Okay, there's a few more I think that was up there. The procurement process, grow local skills and employment, going to work through the head maintenance contract.
So grow your local skills and employment going to work. So the head maintenance contracts, and we have 4, they don't quite cover the state, but a large proportion of it. We will be working with them, and I think there's over 1,700 trades registered with our head maintenance contractors. And as you would be aware, the head maintenance contractors don't do the works. They are the superintendent, if you like, that manage the contracting process and the due diligence of the works. So I mean, given this is about jobs and it is about getting local trades business, as I mentioned earlier, we will be working with the head maintenance contractors to make sure that the tradies in their region know about them. They know how to get on their books. It's clear, it's communicated. If they have any issues, they can contact us. And making it a requirement of our head maintenance contractors to go out, and when we put out a request for work, that they do actually, as one of the requirement, that they actually are going to new trades that they have not done business with before, to make sure there's a spread of economic activity amongst the trades across WA. Will CHOS have access to the element of funding for refurbishments indicated for tenant relocations? So, yeah, look, when we are trying to define how we manage the relocation process, depending on your involvement in that process, yes, I mean, it depends if you're managing the process, yes. So I think it will just come down to what we negotiate at that time for that property and those tenants. There is $6 million for relocations, and it will come down to how do we do this together and make this work well. So yeah, that's not off the table.
I would highlight 6 million sounds a lot, but there's an accounting treatment within there that covers a range of things, including administration systems, as well as the pure costs of relocating tenants, whether that be, relocation services or reconnection of services, etc. So whilst your eyes might light up at 6 million, it's far from that figure, I'm afraid.
Will the refurbishments include energy efficiency? Yes, I think Nigel's spoken to that. We'll be looking at making ways to make these assets more sustainable and a reduction in their energy footprint.
I would say there is a live consideration at the moment about potentially putting PV cells and other measures onto social housing. It hasn't reached a resolution yet, but that may be added to the programme as a subsidiary should the funding become available.
Dwayne, is there an opportunity for new Stream 1 properties, so they're the new builds, to be provided to the community housing provider sector for management?
I'll answer that one, yeah, Monica. I think that's something that, so for those who don't know me, my name's Kate Loudon. For those who worked with Stuart Clark in the past, I've taken over from him and Danielle Pender in working on some work with some legacy that I know that many of you have been involved in the past, about putting together a social housing reform package. I've been in the role for about a month now, and I'm looking forward to meeting you all and working with you closely over the next 6 months or so. I think those sorts of conversations about future management or asset transfers are things we can talk about in those consultations and in those conversations over the next few months. So I think that's something, one to talk about a little bit later.
Okay, thanks, Kate. Do organisations have to have an existing community housing? We've covered that one. Michael, I'm not really clear on the criteria around new builds. It sounded like it could be on CHO-owned land. Yes. Oh, I've just lost the question. Give me a second. But there was reference to having an existing agreement with the department. Could you please elaborate what you mean? Also, could the new build be potentially expansion of capacity on an existing site, even a combination of major refurb and building new capacity? All right, so let me just break that down. Reference to have an existing agreement with department. Can I elaborate what I meant? Look, with the submissions that you'll be providing, if you have land that meets the criteria in terms of a new build on the property that you own, that can be met within the 2-year time frame, that meets the economic and social outcomes outlined, then absolutely it's in scope. So, yep. Could the new build be potentially expansion of capacity? That would be more, I would have thought, a refurbishment rather than new build. New build means new build, new building?
Well, it depends on the scale. If you're talking about a multi-unit site or a group site where you could add an additional dwelling,
sure,
on the basis that it probably fits into their new build.
Yeah.
But I say we'll assess each submission on its merit. It may fit into the refurbishment, may fit into the new build stream.
Great, good question. I think, scrolling down, can you provide an update on the HIP program? I think, can we take that one offline? I've got, if you'd like particular questions on the housing and the homelessness investment package, happy to take those on notice, and we can give an update through Michelle on that if there's particular questions you've got.
The only thing I would say, John, is that you may have seen in the media there was as part of the COVID response, we brought forward some of the capital spend on the HIP programme. So most of the spend was due to be in the next financial year. We brought forward some of that, and major maintenance works on 70 properties, I think it was,
yep.
$2 million was brought into this financial year. Most of that work has now been allocated. And some of the new builds under the HIP programme, 300 new builds, are also being advanced in terms of when we're looking to award contracts. I don't have the figures to hand about those that have been allocated, but we're allocating approximately 30 a month at the moment, yep, of those new builds.
John, how will Aboriginal community housing providers be supported with the SHERP initiative? This is really important for us, and it's absolutely within scope. We are working with Jacqueline Littlejohn and her Aboriginal Outcomes team. Given this is statewide, we absolutely will be needing to consult with the local or regional Aboriginal representative bodies to make sure the work that we're proposing they are aware of and they're with us on that journey, and we are consultative. So yes, absolutely. I think we've answered that one. That's it. Any more? I think I've answered them all.
I think there was one there from Luke Garswood. Did you answer that one? Could you also please consider inclusion of community housing providers that are not registered as being eligible? There are thousands of social housing properties that are managed by organisations not yet in this structure.
Yes.
Yeah, I think what we committed to, we'd come back with a definitive answer on that, and whether, if we were to consider them, just what level of regulatory assurance over the operation of the ongoing housing would be required to meet that. I would say through this is a stimulus response, and therefore a particular policy response that you might get through this package doesn't necessarily indicate that's the way it will operate into the future. This is primarily about how do we get as many of these houses built and refurbished and back into the system as possible. It may mean that there are some slightly bespoke solutions that are created, but as long as we meet that priority, that's our key focus. And then there will be the ongoing conversation really led by Kate around what the policy settings relating to the sector are moving forward.
So thanks. Are there any last questions? This is the final opportunity to put something into the question area and have Nigel, Monica, Buster or Kate respond. Yes, I think a question just popped in.
Can we use our own contractors? That's a really good question. We need to have a balanced approach to this program. There are risks with the speed at which this needs to happen, and the way that this needs to be regulated and reported. There'll be a lot of scrutiny on this program to make sure we do it safely, and the fact we do it on time and on budget. So we are proposing that we'll be using our head maintenance contractors and the pool of trades underneath them for the maintenance stream, and our design and construct and refurb panels for the refurbishment. And for the new builds as well. But as Nigel mentioned, there will be some bespoke initiatives that we might just need to go out to Tenders WA on, and some other mechanisms. Yeah.
So I think the short answer to that is, at the moment, our intent is that the contracts are awarded by us, but we are very open to understanding whether there are particular trades, jobs, cohorts of employment that aren't being met through existing processes and how we can bring those in. So for instance, we're looking at a particular bespoke solution for how we get people with disability working in some of these contracts at the moment. So really welcome any input in terms of if you feel that the existing contracting mechanisms are missing something, and then we can consider how that's done. But the reason for trying to keep that central coordination, as Michelle mentioned, is just a very high degree of reporting that we've got to achieve, and the focus on that, and the tight control and oversight of that we need to be able to have to answer our political masters and the drivers behind that.
Troy, what involvement will be required or expected of the community housing organisations to coordinate a head contractor when developing a community housing owned property?
Very good question, Troy, and that's the sort of level of detail that we're going to need to work through with you about the mechanisms and the actual process at that very operational level of how this will work. So we've got a sense of the overall system and the framework, but it's those sort of nuanced questions we'll need to work through with you as we go.
Yeah.
There's a question, well, it's a thank you and a question from Michael Pugh. Just wanted to thank the panellists and Shelter WA very much. It's been a really useful session. Michael's asked, where can we address additional queries within the department?
You are welcome to take any time. The email address provided in my presentation, which Michelle will share, which is the Housing Stimulus at Communities, I think, wa.gov.au, and we will respond to that. There's probably a coordinated way to do it. Yeah, or email me directly if you've got. I'm happy to share that as well. Who will measure the quality of the product at the end of the process? Really important, and that's one of the reasons we're proposing to use our existing mechanisms, as quality assurance is really important. The safety of the program of works. So we do have mechanisms for quality assurance for those contractors.
Yeah, and that's also about moving forwards. We need to have assurance over certain elements of work. So electrical safety devices is obviously a very focused point for us, given experience of the agency a few years ago. So our asset registers need to have a detailed reflection of every piece of work that's gone on in that space. So every smoke alarm check, every ESD check, every earthing check that's done, we need to capture. And that's part of the reason why we need to make sure that it's fits into a process that currently does that.
Yeah, and to make sure the quoted works are done by an inspector who's qualified, knows what they're looking for. So therefore the works that is actually done is correct and to spec. So yeah. Yeah, certainly. No more questions? Unless anyone has any further. One from Dwayne. Are funds provided to the community housing organisations then dispersed to contractors, or is it paid direct by DOC? Has accounting treatment been considered? I might let Nigel answer that one. So for the head maintenance contractors, payment goes from us via the head maintenance contractors. The contract is held with us, but payment goes through the head maintenance contractors. Through the DNC panels, I would suspect it's straight from us.
Yeah, so payments will be straight from us for the new builds, and as Monica's mentioned, maintenance and refurbishment where they're undertaken by head contractor. We do occasionally direct awards works under maintenance and refurbishments, but again, that would go be paid by Department of Community. So the Treasury funds will come into us and be acquitted by the departments to the contractors, either directly to the head contractor or to the trades and building companies themselves. Accounting treatment considerations, I'm not sure. An end to that question.
Yeah.
Okay. If there aren't any more, I mean, from our side, we're absolutely open to questions. As Monica highlighted, that email address has been set up to take questions from across all the packages so that they can then be directed to the right people. So I'd really encourage you to use that rather than trying to tap into your own contacts, because that team will know best who's handling a particular piece of the project at any one time.
John's got one more. How many assets are being disposed of through this exercise? I'm not sure of the question. This is about actually constructing, refurbing and maintaining, not disposals. Yeah, I can't really answer that question.
Okay, if I try and interpret the question, it might be, it's a fantastic project, SHERP and HIP. Do you see that there'll be an increase in the net gain of social housing stock with these packages?
Ah, now that's
the hoary question,
Michelle. What our net numbers will look like across this, we're expecting this to halt the decline of social housing numbers. You will know that this is likely to play out a lot over the next 6 months, dare I say, in the lead up to the elections. You'll know that there has been a decline overall in the net numbers of social housing. Of course, it's a little more nuanced than that. At the same time, there has been improvements in some of the typologies and appropriateness of housing. So, for instance, focus on 1 and 2 beds to provide more appropriate housing to some of our tenants has been a key tenet of Metronet programme, SHERP programme to a degree prior to that. So it's not as simple a question as saying the overall numbers. But part of this was predicated on starting to halt the decline. The next question is, what do we need next? On the back of COVID, we know unemployment's growing. We know the impact that the modelling suggests that will have on our waiting list numbers. And we know that there are particular vulnerable cohorts already starting to emerge out of that. So all I'd say is this isn't the end. There is an ongoing discussion at the moment about what comes after this package in terms of social housing needs of the state.
Thanks, Nigel. So are there any final questions before we close the webinar? No? Okay. Well, thank you again, Monica, Nigel and Buster and Kate for the briefing. Thanks to everybody that was able to be online, and thank you for the questions. Certainly we'll give a commitment to get the PowerPoint out, to curate the questions and to continue to work with the community housing sector so we can have great input into this process and unlock the value of the sector as part of the SHERP package. So if there's no further questions, thank you everybody for your time today, and I look forward to engaging further so we can really have input into the SHERP package. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Michelle.
Thank you, Heather, for making this all work.
Well done. Thank you. See you later.
See you later.